Chosen by Dooku for his incredible physicality and skill, Jango Fett was considered the perfect specimen for the clone army. Having not only taken down a half-dozen Jedi with his bare hands, Jango would further go on to prove his worth by defeating Dooku's own rogue apprentice, Komori Vosa. The Mandalorian bounty hunter would be paid quite handsomely to take on his role as the genetic template for the clone army. And when the task was done, Jango Fett would look upon millions with his own face, fitted with armaments for battle. But of course, the clones themselves were fiercely loyal to the Republic, since protecting it was all that they knew. So then, what did they actually think of their collective father, considering he died publicly working for the Separatist movement against the Republic? And on the flip side, what was Jango Fett's own opinion on his own clones? And how did Boba Fett respond to having millions of brothers in one giant family that he was never a part of? Well, my friends, in today's video, we are going to open a holocron and discuss how the clones regarded their template and what the Fetts thought of them in response. It's actually pretty surprising that the Clone Wars series never delved into the clones' own thoughts on their collective father, considering how in-depth the series usually goes with the clones' feelings on their individuality. In fact, Jango was rarely even touched on in the series besides the few episodes where Boba is trying to get revenge on Windu. Because of this, we will predominantly have to look in the pages of Legends, as well as some hints in various lines of dialogue to piece together the true answer. When Jango Fett was selected as the template, along with his substantial paycheck, he also had a few other demands. He desired to have his own, unaltered clone free of any growth hormones or mental tampering for himself, who he decided to raise as his son. His second demand was he requested an elite task force of clones to train personally. Going beyond this, Jango would also formulate the training regiment and curriculum for all of the clones, even giving them cursory training as Mandalorians. But the very first batch of clones out of the entire cloning facility would become the clone commandos and the ARC troopers at least, the greatest fighters that the clone army would produce. These would be the clones that Jango actually met in person and trained besides. Because of this, the first ARCs and commandos were far more deadly than the average clone, which was why they were usually designated in smaller squads. This personal relationship that the first clones had with Jango resulted in them having strongly positive opinions towards their father. They were loyal to the Republic first, but Jango was a close contender. So much so that they nearly formed a cult to follow Jango and believed that they had the right that any other Mandalorians had. These clones were instilled with the Mandalorian's sense of honor, and part of that honor is a near worship of your mentor. They perceived Jango Fett as an aspiration that could be attained with hard work and experience. However, once it came out that Jango was in league with the Separatists, the ARC troopers and commandos refused to give in to the hate that the Republic was pushing for their own father. They would rationalize Jango's choices post-mortem, convincing themselves and each other that he only served Dooku because he was an honor-bound warrior, and that the Count must have forced him to honor a prior commitment. It was also because of this that these troopers carried a certain amount of mistrust for the Jedi Mace Windu, especially the commandos, who ended up not really trusting any Jedi and preferred working alone separate from them. As we notice in the Bad Batch, it's the commandos who really take the loyalty to the Empire without any question whatsoever. The only outlier of this situation would be the ARC Trooper Rex, who we know, looking at the timeline, was one of the few ARC Troopers that would never meet Jango personally. He didn't start out as an ARC Trooper, but was a Reg during the Battle of Geonosis, and was promoted sometime shortly after. When it came to the vast majority of the Regs within the clone army though, they were evidently kept in the dark about Jango Fett, and information on him was scarce. All of them received the usual Mandalorian curated videos as part of their training and their education. But beyond that, they knew very little about the man who they were born from. Any questions they would ask were met with a terse summary of who he was and what he did. This led to a very loose knowledge of the Mandalorian, and therefore indifference at best or mild contempt at worst. Ironically enough, it seems that the knowledge of their template wasn't something that was really talked about or commonly spoken of even among the clones. In the Bad Batch, Tech makes a very short statement about the clones being made from a man named Jango Fett, as the way he words the sentence makes it sound like it was more of an obscure fact than a known truth. But that was not to say that all the clones were indifferent to their originator. There were clone troopers who during the war would fight against Mandalorians who had allied with the Separatists. These battles would include the raid against Kamino, which occurred in Legends, and as a result, These specific troopers hated Mandalorians and regarded the memory of Jango with disgust. In fact, they went so far as to even hate the ARC troopers, as well as the commandos. These clones considered the adoration of Mandalorian culture as bordering on treason, and the admiration of Jango Fett as unforgivable, a betrayal beyond words. But what of their father's side of things? What did Jango Fett think of his clones? We get a very small moment in Attack of the Clones when Kenobi is first meeting Jango. Obi-Wan remarks that his clones are very impressive, and that he must be very proud of them. Jango responds by just saying that he's just a simple man trying to find his way in the universe, and then softly follows this up by saying, "They'll serve you well. I can guarantee it." The truth of the matter is that Jango was confident in the Mandalorian curriculum, one that he personally orchestrated for the army, as he wouldn't let copies of himself be without proper training. Jango's pride and honor could not allow this. However, this was pride of himself, not for the clones. Jango didn't care much for his clones at all, and at one point referred to them as livestock and cannon fodder. He knew exactly why they were being bred, and he was not a fan of it at all. It was a shame that he had died literal moments before seeing them in action. But of course, he only really cared for his son, whom he invested quite a bit of time, effort, and love. He only agreed to do this because he was getting paid a lot of credits, and saw it as an opportunity to perhaps start to settle down with a clone of his own. Jango cared far more for his son Boba than any clone, as he didn't see Boba as a clone at all. He requested that the boy be unaltered so that he could grow up naturally. Jango Fett did not find anyone in the galaxy that he had ever trusted, and because of this, he believed he could only trust himself and Boba. He considered Boba to be a real person, unlike the rest of the clones, and his only confidant in the galaxy. The bounty hunter loved his son deeply and taught him everything he knew, honing Boba into a warrior all his own. Jango took Boba on many missions as a young boy. Boba's relationship to the clones is a bit more complicated than his father. Unlike Omega, who was at least raised alongside the rest of the clones, Boba got to have a childhood and a father. And like his father, he held barely any sentiment towards his fellow clones whatsoever. He wasn't raised on training programs or group education sessions. He considered himself to be Jango's only real son, and we know this because of a small interaction line in the recent Battlefront 2 game. Palpatine mentions something about Boba's family, to which he replies, "The clones weren't my brothers." Boba says this again in the Clone Wars when he was trying to infiltrate Windu's Republic cruiser and kill the Jedi Master. He would take a blaster from one of the older clones and strike him down. Boba hesitated for a moment when he saw his father's face, but when the clone said that they were brothers, Boba tells him that they were not. Despite this, Boba only stuns the clone instead of murdering him. This would actually continue to be a trend with Boba, where he didn't regard the clones as family, but would go out of his way to avoid harming them directly. With that said, he desperately attempted to distance himself from the clones, more than likely why he kept his helmet on at all times when dealing with the Empire. Once the clones started being decommissioned, there was a sour taste left in the mouths of the galaxy following the Clone War. No one wanted to even look at a battle droid or the face of Jango Fett ever again due to the scars of the war. While Boba was definitely not a follower of the Mandalorian way, he would keep his helmet secure and not far from him at all times. Judging by his interaction with Bo-Katan and the Mandalorian, he highly disliked being mistaken for a clone, considering he was Jango's own son and not a soldier bred to be subservient to the Republic and die. Boba saw the clones as subhuman after Order 66. He hated that the inhibitor chips made them like droids despite all their striving towards individuality, and he hated that his father's face was associated with betrayal and tyranny. Boba held no love for the Jedi nor the Republic, and could care less whether they stood or fell. But he did care about the Mandalorian honor and the code that his father taught him, and could rarely bring himself to kill the face of his own father, who had been taken from him far too soon. And that, my friends, is what the clones and the Fetts thought of one another. Tell us, is there any sentiment here that shocked you, or is this in line with what you had anticipated? As always, my friends, thank you so much for visiting the channel today, and may the Force be with you.